Mm.
The Nutter Butter Shake's pretty good.
And on that note, welcome back to Biblecraft. I'm here with Ben and Nolan, here chilling out in the server. We're going to be answering some questions. We're going to be doing some shenanigans. It should be a good time. I forgot something that I needed for my chest before I venture off. Nolan's going to direct me at some point tonight to find a dark oak forest, which will be good because I need more dark oak. But anyways, if you're in the chat, thank you for joining. Let me make sure all of our audio levels are balanced, actually. Can you guys both say hello real quick?
Hello.
Hey guys, it's me, Nolan.
All right,
And
I
this
think...
is Ben. And I have a question.
Uh-oh.
Which of our milkshakes brings the most
No!
boys to
No one had another buttermilk.
No one is going to get that
Actually-
reference, Jacob.
No,
Everyone is going to get that reference. Hello, Mark. Welcome.
I was at Sonic the other day. I got the caramel milkshake. Actually, really good.
Is it?
Is it
It's goated with the sauce.
Goated.
that mean?
Really good.
Like, I've heard Kellen say it, but I kind of ignore most of Kellen's slang because it takes too much brain power to figure it out.
So you're dumb.
Which is funny because it takes incredibly little brain power to produce.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Don't Alex call it. He said yours, Ben. Winky face. Yikes.
Thanks, Alex.
Anyways, all right. Goal for tonight. Also, for anyone who missed, I did a building expansion, which means I put these paintings here for a little secret hiding spot. Ooh.
Just in case we need to cut out the milkshake part for the VOD, we're gonna do a reintroduction right here.
Welcome back to Biblecraft.
Yeah, welcome to Biblecraft.
No, I don't think I'm
You
gonna
worry too much.
I do. Hey, it's your job on the line soon too, not just mine. Mark said, "Oh boy."
I think a sense of humor is important for a youth pastor.
Yes, but for anyone who missed last week's episode, here at Enderman. Hello, Enderman. He teleported away. Now I'm terrified. I worked on building these two little bridges across this big chasm here. So I hear burning Enderman somewhere and don't want to get punched off. So I'm working on turning this here into something. I'm not entirely sure what yet. But this here is the area where I want to get some dark oak, because I think that'll contrast nicely with this cherry. Where did you teleport to? Now you are going to die, because I hit you 3 times with the netherite sword and you've been burning. Cool. Well, there goes all that. Alright, Nolan, do you remember which way the dark oak was?
Hang on, I'm in the middle of something. It's roughly in the direction of that one village that we've been going to.
Follow the netherrack road.
Cool.
The one with the mending, the village with the mending villager, not the plains village.
I'm slightly louder than the... Okay, that's good to know. Thanks, Alex. I'll turn myself down. Let me know if that fixed it. I turned it down pretty significantly, but I do want us all to be generally balanced. The one that you built, like, huge library at, Nolan, or?
No, different one.
As all things should be.
I don't know where any of your villages are. That's the thing. I've never really...
Okay, I'm going to be back in the overworld pretty quick here.
Okay. That's normal for him. I'm slightly louder than the rest. Oh boy. Thanks, Mark. Yeah. I was going to say, part of that is just balancing stuff on my end. And every week it's honestly different because I usually have to adjust different settings between when I'm swapping back and forth between Minecraft and Fortnite. So part of that is just going to be the inevitable issue of playing multiple games on this channel with the same OBS settings, and I don't... This is going to sound really lazy. I don't feel like taking the time to adjust all my OBS settings to have 2 different settings for different games. Which I know in theory would make it all so much easier, but I just haven't done it yet.
Yeah, couldn't you just do like a settings folder for Minecraft and a settings folder for Fortnite?
I think so, in theory.
Could.
But again, that would be require me to actually do it, which isn't something I'm very fond of.
Meet me in the nether.
In the nether?
I'll show you the way there.
Okay,
yeah.
Let me, I'm trying to smelt up some stone bricks real quick, so I'll be right there.
Content creation's an easy job, right?
Oh, obviously. And it's not finicky at all with the content, or with the software that they provide.
You'll find that concentration is very important to succeeding in my class.
Oh, that's what
Send
looks
every
wrong.
professor to you ever.
Oh, I do have Faithful on. I kind of want to get a new texture pack. If anyone has any good texture packs for vanilla for 1.20, let me know. Drop them in chat and I'll look them up. Oh boy, I already hear a ghast. Nolan, what is going on?
If you kill the ghast, I'm in trouble.
Where are you?
Nolan,
No.
Nolan,
Going
Nolan,
up the ladder.
Nolan,
What
dodge
ladder?
the gas fireballs like you dodge. Nolan, dodge the
Uh-oh.
fireballs like you dodge Dr. Fish's erasers.
Oh,
He did
gosh.
throw an eraser at me in class. That was funny.
That was funny. What ladder are you
deserves
climbing? Oh. What? Where
Can
does
you
that
make this
ladder
in the corner
go?
one?
That goes to the nether That goes to the nether portal at my house.
Oh, okay.
When I built a nether portal at my own house, that's where it popped up.
Oh, that's weird. Alright.
Yeah, I'm really not a fan of it, but oh well.
Alright. Oh.
Here. Oh,
Okay.
we're also going the wrong way. That was just where I was putting the ladder. I'll show you where the actual place that we're going is.
Okay.
Jacob,
Yeah?
I'm beginning to have doubts about your guide.
Me too. You know what I was thinking about yesterday, Ben?
What were you thinking about yesterday?
Was when we watched Journey
I
to
don't-
the Center of the Earth and you ruined it for me.
Yeah.
For
I'm kind of surprised.
How do you ruin Journey to the Center of the Earth?
Because Ben came at it logically, whereas I was going at it like, they're fighting a dinosaur in the center of the Earth.
Meanwhile, I was like, they just shot like 6 miles into the air in a dinosaur skull, and they're fine.
It's a brilliant movie. It was one that I had grown up watching, but Ben hadn't seen it. And so
Yeah.
like the first times he and I
I'd
hung
never
out on
seen
our
it.
own, we watched it. I don't know why that was popping into my head the other day, but
That's fine.
I just wanted to let you
Brendan
know.
Fraser one.
Yeah,
I love that
it's
movie,
such a
dude.
good one.
The,
I love
the
it.
CGI does not
Oh,
hold up.
absolutely not.
Oh, the CGI of any old movie doesn't hold up. I mean, that never ages well.
Yeah, but I still love it. It's a beautiful movie
Mhm.
with the
I was
beautiful man
actually
that
really
was
disappointed
Brendan Fraser.
I was disappointed when we watched the second one and it wasn't Brendan Fraser that carried over. It was the kid. I
Yeah,
was like, oh, he is
That was-
definitely the
Brendan
less.
Fraser was like
character.
like horribly depressed at that point.
yeah.
Oh, maybe some extra money from a movie chop would have helped. I'm
I
kidding.
mean, you're not wrong.
Money does not buy happiness.
Are you sure?
Amen.
That's why I went into
However-
ministry.
Ah,
Get it? Because never mind. Uh,
Speaking of
I
ministry,
get it.
speaking of ministry,
think
as a
talking
segue,
about-
That's a
and
beautiful
especially
segue.
like pastors who
Flawless
some
segue.
make a lot of money, some who don't make a lot of money. But
Oh,
our
yeah,
topic for the day, Jacob, do you want to actually introduce us to our topic for the day?
our topic for the day is sharing who some of our personal favorite theologians or pastors are. And specifically, I mean, there's multiple ways we can attack it, but also we're going to kind of be looking at the difference in, you know, there's a lot of great theologians or great pastors who we just because we like some of their stuff doesn't mean we agree with everything they say. I'd be surprised if I found anyone who I 100% agreed with. And also sometimes great pastors and theologians make mistakes in their personal lives that then have a negative effect on their teachings in the future.
You saying you don't 100% agree with your senior pastor on everything?
No, I don't, surprisingly. Don't fire
I
me.
wasn't sure.
But yeah, I feel like Nolan, you came up with this topic, so why don't you kick us off?
So I came up with this topic, and I think there needs to be a little bit of like pre-gaming people for like what the topic kind of is about and what prompted this question. Yesterday there was an incident with Mark Driscoll because that tends to happen a lot.
Just yesterday? I thought there'd been issues for a while with him.
Yes, but yesterday a specific one happened. Basically, what happened was so after all the stuff with Mars Hill happened, and I think that's a topic for another time.
Mhm.
But basically, Mark Driscoll used to be the pastor at Mars Hill, which ended terribly, and ended with Mark Driscoll doing some things that were not super great, and then leaving the church. But Mark Driscoll is still in full-time ministry, and after leaving Mars Hill, he went to a different church in a different area. And the way that he left was not necessarily, I don't think, handled with a lot of tact or grace with which he left, and he did not necessarily leave super well. So it's hard for people to still entrust him with like ministry, and I think for good reason. But a lot of the people who are still pretty accepting of him. I think a lot of the times it's a lot more of the charismatic crowd who still accepts him. And a big part of Mark Driscoll's like theology is he was very good back in the day for like young men and for boys and for just like teaching them to embrace their like masculinity and to like be godly leaders and godly men. And that was something that Mark Driscoll is really big on. I think in the last couple of years, especially since opinions have greatly, I think, soured toward him, and since a lot of other stuff has happened, his brand of biblical masculinity has taken on a weird tone. But a lot of guys in like the super reformed or like super charismatic communities, which I know are two different communities, but there's a little bit of crossover when you get to like.
It is interesting how
radically
some of
different
those
sides of the
end up
spectrum.
combining at certain points with certain views, but that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, which is interesting. Yeah, totally another topic, but also super interesting to look at. But at a conference, I think yesterday, or maybe it was this morning.
I
maybe it was
just
the day
pulled up
before,
an
I don't know.
article about
Anyways,
it at a conference at James River Church. On
And
In Virginia, that sounds like a Virginia
the
place name.
14th. So yeah, that would have been yesterday.
okay, yeah. So yesterday, he
Or-
went up on stage.
Or no,
to
sorry,
talk
it was on
about-
April 12th, so that would have been Friday.
Yeah, that sounds about right. The articles must have been April 14th.
Yeah.
But stuff kind of the information about it kind of came out a little bit more recently.
Mhm.
Basically, what he ended up doing was he went on stage and he was because they opened the conference with they had a guy come on stage to do some like acrobatic routine that started with him like taking off his shirt and like dancing around in a really weird way, and like holding a sword, which was really strange. It was like a conference about biblical masculinity, and they brought in what was essentially like a PG version of a male stripper.
Yeah.
Which I think that I think the original intent was to just have like this acrobatic performance, which again, if you are familiar with the charismatic church, that's not exactly surprising. A lot of times they'll bring in like stuff like that, not necessarily like for any like specific reason, but sometimes just as like a fun thing to do, I guess. But
I was gonna say it's the same
I'm
thing as having
so-
an opening at a youth conference if it's done well. Something to get the crowd going, so people are entertained and like invested. Because it's a weekend-long conference, so something to give like a mental break and a little bit of lightheartedness beforehand.
anyway, but I think what ended up happening was and you're right about that. I think the performance was a lot more sensual than people were wanting or expecting it to be. And so when Mark Driscoll got up to speak, I think probably, again, I find myself agreeing with Mark Driscoll here, which is a little bit weird, but he called it out and he was like, he said it in his like weird Mike Driscoll way. He was like, oh, there's a Jezebel spirit here moving in that performance or something like that, which,
Oh gosh,
Mhm.
which, whatever.
that's
But
funny.
however it went, he got mad about it and he called it out. And then like in the background, you can hear like the pastor of the church like running up on stage to stop him, like, Mark, how could you?
Yeah.
Like, because I think while the intent behind it was to be like, dudes, that was weird, don't do that. I think what it ended up sounding a lot more like was hey, I'm so much more spiritual than you guys, let me tell you why I'm right and why you're wrong about this thing. But
I don't know. I don't know.
because what he should have done was he should have waited and done the biblical thing and gone to the pastor like privately afterwards and been like, hey dude, that was weird, instead of being like, I'm here in this conference to publicly tell you all there's a Jezebel spirit here in this church going through that man. Or
I mean,
whatever.
at the same time, though, is he wrong for calling out something that was apparently, from how you've described it, pretty obviously problematic?
I was gonna say
Like,
I don't necessarily agree with his delivery of the message, but I don't think he was in the wrong.
gonna say,
Because
I
he
don't
either
know
would have
if-
had to leave the conference on his own and just say, I have a difference of opinion, we're not doing this, because him staying and not saying anything would be supporting it.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't necessarily
in
know
that
if I agree
position, I
with
would've
his
said-
message delivery on what was wrong, but I also agree that I think he was in the right to say something about it. And let people,
Yeah, I
because
think
again,
he
people are
should've
going to
said
draw
something
their
about
own conclusions about it, regardless of what he says, or at least hopefully they should. Hopefully, people
See, I
should
wanna
know
be
better than to
careful
listen
because I
to
haven't
anyone.
Sorry.
Hopefully, people are smart enough to know not to listen to anyone pastor, just regardless of what way they're speaking on a topic like that. Oh boy.
like I want to be careful because I haven't actually seen the thing. I don't know
Yeah.
how any
And
of it
I
actually
think
went down. But again, after last
We're-
time, maybe there was some overreaction to some tweets that I did not have full context for. However, what I don't know that from what I hear, it sounds like someone needed to call it out.
Mm-hmm.
And like Jacob said, he can't let himself. He can't support it,
Mm-hmm.
and saying nothing is a form of support for a lot of that stuff.
That's fair. And I think where I differ, I think there should be a due process. Like, I think you can still address it, but I think what he should have done was he should have approached the pastor, like, who organized it separately, or like the organizer or whatever. I think he should have approached them separately, not publicly in front of a huge conference that was being like live streamed.
Mhm.
And then I think he should have gone to him and been like, brother, I don't appreciate this, and I think that you should probably correct this publicly. And then if the guy was like, oh no, that's stupid, then he should have corrected it publicly like that. But I think he should have given the organizer a chance to correct it.
Maybe. So at that point, then he would have had to delay going on stage.
Yeah.
Like he would have had to wait and talk to the guy before he went out there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'm currently safe
Take it
enough in a
where?
tree here. So I found an article that USA Today, oddly enough, posted about the incident. It was big news. Like, it wasn't just like Christian news. USA
That's
Today, Mark Driscoll said, yeah, like Nolan said, the Jezebel Spirit opened our event. Let's see, where does it say?
it's a strange.
So it was a conference. It's held by James River Church, which existed to inspire and equip men to live out God's vision for manhood to be the husbands, fathers, and leaders God called them to be. Which is, I genuinely think that men's conferences of that style need to be more prevalent, but that's a whole other conversation. But it says Driscoll's remarks.
Any of us disagree with that.
Yeah, but it says Driscoll's remarks came following a performance from Alex Magala, a sword swallower who took off his shirt, climbed up a pole, and swallowed a sword live at the conference. And so Driscoll said, before the word of God was even opened, there was a platform in a high place, and on it was a pole, the same thing that's used in a certain club for women who have the Jezebel spirit to seduce men.
I'm sorry, what?
So because he climbed up on a acrobatic device, I'm trying to think of ways to say that's not as explicit as what it actually is.
Yeah, no, I get the pole thing.
Which part?
I don't.
So I don't necessarily agree with with how he said it. But Lindahl told the audience afterwards, so the head pastor of the conference said he's out of line, and then cited Matthew 18 as Driscoll left the stage, saying, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained the brother.
But the thing is, it wasn't a sin against Driscoll alone.
Yeah.
It was again, I don't know what the performance was. It could have been an overreaction.
Yeah.
Not every poll is a problem. Although, depending
The
even on
performance
how
was weird.
I mean, it sounds weird as all heck. I don't know
watched
why
the
you
video
would
of it today. It was
open
weird.
Yeah.
Okay. But the thing is, it's not a private disagreement. That is a public church thing.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, churches get into a lot of trouble when they decide that every incident needs to be only talked about behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Because then all of a sudden the doors never open.
Yep.
That's where there's a place for public accountability and publicly calling something out when something weird or wrong has happened. And again, I want to say again, I don't know what actually happened. I haven't seen the video, so I want to be careful with that. But
and I haven't seen the actual video myself either. That's a good point that we need to make clear. However, and so again, I think it's more of a I guess this is actually an interesting way to take it. Do you think that there is an appropriate way, or let me rephrase. Obviously, in a lot of cases, we are called, as Matthew 18 says, to go and talk to the brother who wronged us one-on-one. However, what would be some instances where calling it out in that instance would be necessitated?
I think one is if damage is going to be caused if it's delayed. So say a pastor is giving a sermon in a church and he starts to openly support homosexuality. I think at that point a member of the congregation is within their rights to stand up and say something in the middle of the sermon. I think that sermon is no longer orthodox. It is no longer in line with God's word. And even an Orthodox sermon, there's nothing in the Bible that says you can't interrupt the pastor. But I mean, normally you don't. It's impolite. However, that congregation isn't all going to sit there and wait for 2 hours for you to go have your meeting with the pastor. God's word is being mishandled and misproclaimed in front of you. There's I think, a very legitimate case can be made for saying something right then. That's an example. A lot of similar things could be. If a pastor was trying to say that Christ wasn't divine, I think, again, the congregation member has a right to, and maybe even a duty, to stand up and start arguing with him and show him from the text it's not just a shouting match between two people who have different opinions. It's a biblical matter.
And honestly,
start reading off verses.
So while I don't disagree with you, I want to push back slightly. Because obviously there are certain times when heresy is evident. Like if someone says Christ isn't divine, that is very clearly heretical. However, in an age where I'm trying to think how to, you and the three of us know a lot more about the Bible than the average believer, and that's just because of the fact that we spent thousands of dollars learning about it. Like that's not to other people's fault. That's just because that's what we went to college for. You know, we spent a lot of time
as a career.
So what I want to push back on is, and I have had this happen. I've had, and I almost encourage this to an extent. If someone in the congregation disagrees with me, whether they're in the youth group or in the Sunday morning service, with something I say, if you have a question, come talk to me afterwards. And I've had multiple times when people have come up to me and asked me what I meant by something because they thought it came off as not heretical, but incorrect. And once we're able to talk to it about it, they understand my reasoning and they see that I was saying truth and they just heard it either incorrectly or didn't quite understand what I meant. And so I do want to push back against if it's obvious and blatant heresy, yes, we need to call it out right away. But it's something that is a very fine line because, there's people within a church who view different things as heretical. And even if they're not actually heretical. Does that make sense?
It does. And that's why I chose two examples that I think are very cut and dry, very clear. I don't think there's much room to argue on either of those two if you're an actual believing Christian. So those ones, again, that's not when the Calvinism-Arminianism debate is in focus. That doesn't necessitate standing up and stopping a sermon. I think saying something like that actually puts people's salvation in jeopardy is of a different caliber.
Yes.
I've also never actually stood up and said something in a service. And I mean, there's a time and place, too. If you're a visitor at some random church you've never been to before,
that's not the time or the place.
It's probably more proper to just not go back.
Yeah.
If this is your church and they've got a guest pastor in, I don't know. If you're a guest speaker at a conference, and I mean, for one, you really should be discerning about what conferences you agree to go speak at. But, I don't know. Again,
conference that will name one good conference that will let Mark Driscoll speak for them.
I don't know. Again, I honestly don't know that much about Mark Driscoll. I know he did Mars Hill, and I know I'm pretty sure he signed off on the back cover of that one book that we all read for small group ministry and hated. So that's about my only interaction with him. Was he a big part of the emergent church movement?
I don't know, actually.
We're getting a little off track, I think.
I don't know. I don't know that we are. I want to pursue this.
I think it's good conversation. I think we should pursue. Okay, you're right. I was just thinking we were detracting because I don't think any of us have actually said any of our favorite pastors yet.
We'll get to it. We got 2 hours.
This is a good conversation. Sorry guys, I don't want to detract at all.
I will say, so Mark Driscoll is actually a good example where there are some things that he's written and some things he's said that I personally think are 100% biblical, good manhood, good biblical masculinity, that are good and uplifting and accurate. However, that kind of does then feed into the conversation of how do we balance when we ourselves view something as biblical or non-biblical, or what am I trying to say here? To what extent are you still willing to listen to a speaker who you disagree with?
Can we use stuff from people who we don't think are correct and everything?
Yeah.
So does the speaker have to be 100% correct, or maybe there's room for some differentiation there.
Mhm.
Because the speaker has to be like 98% correct about stuff before you'll use his book or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was kind of taken aback by this. We were arguing about worship in theology seminar because, of course, it was me and most of the other seniors last semester,
Yeah.
and so of course we argued about worship. But I brought up the Ravi Zacharias thing and was like, would you still use a book that he wrote? And I was very surprised that most of the class said yes. So that kind of made me stop and think, okay, interesting. I would have said no, probably, and I would have assumed most of the rest of the class would say no because of his whole scandal from a few years ago.
I personally would
made-
have said yes, but with the caveat of if I'm recommending it to someone, giving them the context.
Yeah, and that kind of surprised me because you guys.
The problem
and-
is what Ravi Zacharias did was very, very repugnant and reprehensible.
And
like,
very visible.
I don't think that. Yeah, and yeah, especially with the way that it kind of
Just
ended,
say-
I guess.
that makes one question salvation. It's not our place to know that. That God knows that. But anyway, I was surprised. In hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have been. You guys, and I think anyone listening realizes I am a bit quicker to the fire and brimstone than most people.
Mhm.
But I would have expected most people will say no. He has tainted himself to the point where even if what he wrote was good, we don't really necessarily want to use it anymore. But then when I say that, I think there are some people and some arguments I would still say the messenger doesn't taint the argument that much.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Maybe there's some hypocrisy in my mind at that point, but
Alex
it's
just
something I've
said.
thought about a bit
A-
since then.
Alex just said Ben gets angry.
No, never.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Kinda-
So that's almost like a different conversation than when I was going, because I was going more the teaching aspect. But that same conversation, different angle. But in my mind, every author and every pastor who I've ever listened to and ever will listen to has a sin problem in their life.
Yeah.
To different extents, obviously.
Mhm.
Hopefully less so than Ravi Zacharias.
Yeah.
But every pastor I know, I mean myself included, has sin in their life, and that's an inescapable fact of being fallen humans. And so that's where I'd say I would argue that Ravi Zacharias's texts and sermons can still be very profitable for our use in personal life and growth, as long as we have the context and remember, like, this guy had this huge sin problem. And I feel like that's a really easy thing to overlook a lot of times when we're listening to, name your favorite theologian, John Piper, MacArthur, C.S. Lewis, any of them, legitimately any of them, they all had sin in their life, and they all do have sin in their life. Dr. McLeod, Dr. Fitch, they all have sin in their life. Again, hopefully not to the extent of Ravi Zacharias, but they all have it regardless of what it is. And so I try to keep that in mind and not judge the teaching for the teaching, not from the character of the person.
Ultimately,
think
through any
more-
person who's speaking, like you, the main player in the Bible is God, because the people are fallible. God is not fallible. God does not sin.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to keep that in mind.
So there can be an extent, I guess, where at a certain point, if preaching and writing theology is for the purpose of giving God the glory, the only people who I would stop reading for my own personal use would be people who I personally couldn't get past their issues and their personality. And so for some people who Ravi Zacharias' sins, I'm not saying I approve of them, but for some people it might be harder than for myself to get that fact off of their mind while reading his stuff.
Yeah.
And
And
so if
there's-
that's the stumbling block for you and you can't get that fact out of your mind when you're reading his works, then it's not profitable and it's not glorifying God. But same thing that goes for writers, and I feel like Driscoll sometimes falls into this category, is that he views, sometimes I feel like his writings and his speaking occasionally can lead to glorifying himself instead of God, or glorifying masculinity instead of God. And so I almost bring it back to the same thing that I use to evaluate any teaching is it biblical and who is it glorifying? Which is a whole other topic again. I'm kind of branching off in 3 different ways at the same time.
Conversations do that.
Nolan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that one, believers have a duty to be discerning.
Mhm.
We are not called. I mean, I think if we took everything at face value, we would be actually doing a disservice to a God who gave us a rational mind
Yes.
and a thinking mind. So I want to keep that kind of at the forefront of my thinking here.
Mhm.
I'm in the middle of trying to tame a goat. But I also think that there is again, do not publicly support somebody who you would not in good faith recommend their teaching. Like with somebody like Ravi Zacharias, I would go as far as to not publicly attach my name to Ravi Zacharias Ministries or anything like of that nature.
Yeah.
And also, likewise, I also think that Mark Driscoll's really problematic teachings, and I think that we would do ourselves well as ministers to distance ourselves from that teaching as well.
Yeah.
Again, that's not to say that you can't learn anything and you can't, and that's not to say that, again, like biblical masculinity is a good thing. Like it is good to teach men to be, it is good to teach men to be strong, to be men of God whose strength comes from the God that they serve. That's it. I
Men
don't
will
think
be
it's a
men
good thing.
regardless, so we need to teach them how to do it right.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to put it. Yeah, that is kind of my thoughts. Again, I also want to be like beyond careful with who I support. There are some great speakers who I have looked up to and admired a lot who have gone super wayward. I even just think of like guys who like led mission trips or like counseled me at summer camp who have gone apostate.
Yeah.
And like, shoot, did everything that this person taught me like not matter because they ended up rejecting Christ a couple years after they counseled me at camp? I don't think so. But also, like, would I ever point to my son at camp and say, hey, go to this guy, he discipled me? No, because I will never point any child of mine toward a person who I think will be an improper discipler of them.
That's a good point.
So I can look back at like guys like that and like respect like what they did for me, but also like remember that ultimately like God is deserving of glory, man is not.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with Mark Driscoll stuff, I think it's tough. I think for like guys of like my dad's generation who grew up in like when my dad was like in his like 30s, maybe late 30s, is when with like target demographic. When all of like Mark Driscoll's original stuff was happening with Mars Hill and like in kind of Mars Hill's heyday before all the trouble that came about. And so I think especially I would say for like I don't think my dad ever has been a Mark Driscoll guy. I know I didn't find out Mark Driscoll's name from my dad. I found his name out because of the rise and fall of Mars Hill because it's before my time.
Yeah.
But guys of that generation, like I know that my buddy Zach has like talked about how like man, Mark Driscoll was really good for like my dad when we were growing up.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if your dad was a Mark Driscoll guy.
Yeah, I don't think my dad is a Mark Driscoll guy. And Dad, if you're listening, I am not a Mark Driscoll guy either. I know that you're.
I was gonna say that's. No, I don't think any of us would say that we are.
Again, I haven't actually read almost anything by him. From what I've heard, I would not. But
And also, there's like his whole shtick about like this conference has a Jezebel spirit. Like that's weird. Like, dude, just talk normal. Like,
okay, but I guess to his credit, in his tradition, that is a very legitimate thing. I think is again, I don't agree with it, but I want to at least be fair in representation.
Yeah.
The more charismatic movements do see more of a continuation between the spirits and now. I would not say Jezebel. I would have expected a Harlot of Babylon out of that, but that's I don't know.
That's neither
Who
here nor
knows?
there.
also kind of Mark. That's kind of Mark Driscoll's MO. Like he talks about like Jezebel spirit a lot. That's a common theme.
And part of that is
Jezebel
his
wasn't
emphasis
actually-
on sexual purity and avoiding temptation. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of how we talked about. I think this might have been on the first or second episode. We kind of talked about everyone has a thrust of ministry when they're preaching, and each one of us has our thing that we'll always find it a lot easier and more natural to point back to while we're preaching, regardless of the topic. And I feel like that's kind of his thrust of preaching.
Hmm. Which is, I mean, somewhat legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
Purity is important.
Mm-hmm.
Purity is definitely undervalued in wider culture, even if the church doesn't always properly handle the subject. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. And again, the whole conversation about who can you use and who can't you use,
Mm-hmm.
I'm still not fully decided on that. I think I really go back and forth because there are some things that I read and I'm like, yeah, it's fine that this guy wrote that. The thing itself is good no matter what he was. But then there's also the whole a person's character really does kind of help determine something about the argument.
Yeah, and so like I would never use Ravi Zacharias' writings and stuff on family life or marriage.
Yeah.
But if it's a random book talking
How
about
sure-
Galatians, you know, like
How sure are we that all that happened?
pretty
all
sure.
I
Ravi
know-
stuff, very.
All I really know is that it all came out after he died, and that always raises a warning bell to me
Yeah.
because it's like, well, the defendant can't defend themselves.
Yep, I agree.
But it seemed pretty sure people at Emmaus were talking about it, and I trust our professors.
It was
typically
an
to have a good opinion
overwhelming
about
amount of
stuff.
evidence.
Okay, fair enough.
Which
Yeah, it was kind of a.
I'm
there's
not
no
saying
way
that
it
all
could
of them
not
were
be.
honest, because I'm sure there was
Mhm.
at least one person who just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna hop on this train. But
There usually is, but
there was an overwhelming amount of evidence to where at least some of it had to be real.
okay, fair enough.
What are our home coordinates, by the way?
I don't know.
Oh, never mind. I think I see our cherry blossoms in the distance.
You see Nolan's Towers?
Not yet. I'm coming from the other way. I'm coming from like behind the Nether portal.
I'm still trying to harvest goat horns.
So yeah, Nolan. A couple of favorite professors, theologians, pastors, etc.
Can somebody else start that one out?
Ben, go for it. I know
Yeah.
you're probably the most familiar with specific theologians.
I don't know. You might be surprised. Let's see. For one, I really like the Apostle Paul. I read a lot of his
Cop
stuff.
out.
Yeah, it is.
Biblical authors don't count.
Okay, so John MacArthur is a big one. I don't want to say that he's the only one or even the primary one, but when I was getting a Bible before coming to Bible college, I wanted a good study Bible. I think I listened to like half a podcast of his or whatever because I'd found his and it looked good. I just wanted to make sure when he was actually speaking, he sounded okay. He sounded good, so I've used his for study notes for a long time. Since then, I've read a lot more of his commentaries and stuff, and typically I align with him on a lot of things, and I appreciate his insights.
Mm-hmm.
So he's up there. Spurgeon is one I like a lot, although I will say his preaching style is definitely a bit dated. I don't know that I would still preach the way Spurgeon preached in every way. He very much comes out of a more reformed covenantal view, so a lot of his sermons will be quicker to jump back. That sounds horrible if I phrase it that way. Hang on.
How dare his sermons jump back to the Bible? Okay.
No, not the Bible, Christ. So
Uh.
he is of the school that sees Christ behind every dot and iota in the Bible, and there's some very good tendencies within that. But every now and then, the actual
Maybe that's
original
a bad thing?
the original point of the message can sometimes get obscured if you're so quick to jump forward to the ultimate fulfillment in Christ. You don't sometimes do enough justice to the original text and the original writing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's always important. Christ is important. Christ needs to be bridged to. There is a time, though, when you can be so quick to see Christ in a text that you don't see what the text is actually about. So, like, if I'm not able to preach about King David without talking about Christ as just a part of it. So, if every passage about King David, the next sentence is, it goes like, and King David did this, and this was later done more fully by Christ. And then you go off on a tangent about Christ. At some point, David's not getting the time he should be.
I think David gets plenty of time that he deserves to be talked about when it talks about his sin with Bathsheba. But
Well, there's so much more to talk about David than just the Bathsheba thing. And that's actually something I was thinking about when we were talking about Ravi Zacharias, is that just because David had that sin, that does not negate all of his obedience and all of the good things that he wrote for us.
Mhm.
And a significant chunk of the Bible is David's writing, and it's still legitimate. He fell. He had a sin. Everyone else did too.
And if
And
all of us
his
were
mission
discredited
was-
for our sins, we wouldn't be able to do the ministry we are.
Yeah. So David, I think, is going to have a harder and harder time being preached in the upcoming years with the whole Me Too movement and everything. Sometimes his story, I think, feels a little too relevant. But
Yes, but that's also not at all what that story is saying. Like,
no, it's not.
if you look at David and Bathsheba's like sin and you read, oh, this was sexual assault, you're not reading it right. There's like,
No.
because I think that's literally why like Amnon and Tamar is one chapter later, because that is very, very clearly a sexual assault, like undeniably so.
Yeah.
And that's bookended with and it's also described as that by the original author, who, when describing David and Bathsheba's sins, does not at all categorize it as sexual assault.
They are presented very differently. Both cases read very differently. But so anyway, all that is to say, I like Spurgeon. He is a bit dated in some places, but I do like him a lot. I use his devotional for the mornings, and I do have his sermons, like copies of his sermons in books. I appreciate them. Definitely not a modern preacher. Not going to say that's necessarily a bad thing, but Spurgeon's up there. I like him a lot. I have read a decent bit of John Calvin, and I appreciate a lot of Calvin. There's a lot more behind him than just the predestination election stuff. He wrote commentaries and sermons on most of the Bible, and again, when we hear Calvinism, we associate it with the election debate. That's really only one small facet of everything theologically that Calvinism and Calvin were involved in. There's a lot more to read and to gain from him than just that one facet of theology. So MacArthur, him, I like Grudem's theology. I'm looking at my shelf right now. Grudem's theology is a good one. I don't know much else about Wayne Grudem. I don't know if he's done much besides his theology book or not, but it's a good systematic one. Who else is on my shelf? I appreciate Lewis in a lot of ways. Again, don't agree with everything he says, but he has a place. He's not as evangelical as I would like. Lewis reads a lot more like an Anglican because he was an Anglican. So there's definitely differences there, but he has a lot to add to the conversation, especially when it comes to Christians interacting with non-Christians. I think that's where Lewis shines, is a understanding of the philosophical basis for God. If you want a biblical exposition of something, don't go to Lewis. If you want philosophical interaction, Lewis is good. I guess those are the big ones. Obviously, I've been highly, highly shaped by the professors here. None of them are really published or written enough that I think they...
Except for KJ Routley by his book on Amazon.
Got him.
Routley has a couple books now.
Yeah.
I think I have most or all of them. So
Little fanboy.
I mean, I like Routley. He's been a great teacher.
No,
but
I know. I'm just kidding.
He's not. It's not like he's contributed some huge, notable theology. Most of the Emmaus professors have. So when I hear this question, I think more. I don't know. There's a certain degree of shaping power that a theologian. I guess maybe not. It's favorites are a thing too. I like MacLeod. I like a lot of what he has to say, but it's not like MacLeod has put forth a new understanding of a doctrine that shaped a ton of people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I guess MacArthur and even Spurgeon don't necessarily fall into that category either. I like Spurgeon as a preacher, and I appreciate MacArthur as an expositor. Neither of them have necessarily changed the wheelhouse of theology.
No.
So it's a subjective thing. I don't know why I'm trying to explain subjective opinion, but
I don't know either.
yeah, it's me. I'm talking myself in circles again.
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah, it does.
I had a question about, and sorry, this is going to be another bunny trail, but I was just interested in what you meant by something you said.
Oh, fun.
When you were talking about Spurgeon,
Yes.
and I know you acknowledged already that how you phrased it might not have been the best, so that's why I'm wondering.
Yes.
In a church sermon, so not like a theology course, but in a church sermon, do you have a problem with things being pointed back to Christ repeatedly?
No.
Okay.
But it has to have an actual basis in the text. You can't, and this is getting back into a conversation from a few episodes ago. not every single verse in the Bible is a direct prophecy of Christ. And some verses have things to say that aren't just, and then Christ came and saved us from our sins.
I'd agree with that.
So ultimately, that's where the Bible as a whole is going. That's not where every single verse and every single line of everything is going. And that's something that you see a lot if you read old church fathers from kind of pre-Protestant Reformation. You will see a lot of allegorizing because they try to see sometimes Christ behind absolutely every sentence of the Bible. And that leads you into weird things like when they try to argue that the tent pegs of the tabernacle represent Christ somehow. So
Yeah, I agree with you on like the tent peg stuff. That's weird.
I think it's a point.
I don't know if I
think
agree with you on all of
lot
it. I'm going to be honest.
What was that?
So I was going to say I don't know if I agree with you on, like I don't disagree with like there is a point where it becomes unprofitable because it becomes too much of a allegory. But I think if the I'm trying to think of how to phrase it, because we've already kind of loosely had a discussion about this topic already when we were talking about what the main point of the Bible is. It God's glory or is it pointing towards Christ? And so I acknowledge that you and I already disagree on that part, which is fine. But if I'm preaching a sermon, I'm not as worried about them understanding the cultural relevance of what was going on in the text as I'm more concerned about how is what goes on in the text affect their personal belief in Jesus. And so I'm not saying I throw out the cultural relevance because I think that's crucial. But I would say we can reach a point where it becomes unfruitful because we are trying so hard to remind people that it's not just talking about Jesus, but that there's the cultural and historical application as well.
Okay, this is never a point I'm going to make in a... Well, okay, this is not a point I foresee making in a sermon.
Yeah.
This is a point that you make to people who are making sermons, in that you don't want to force readings of the text that aren't there.
Okay.
You don't want to force a reading of Christ. So, like, Pastor Matt at Crossroads, he did an excellent job, I thought, always, of tying the messages back to Christ in a way that was proper. He wouldn't, like, he always... At least to my memory, every sermon ended with something about Jesus. And that's also partially because of his congregation.
Yeah.
There were pretty much always people there who weren't saved. What I'm saying is that there are other things to talk about in the Bible than just Christ. Not every sermon needs to be preached out of the Gospels.
Okay.
I'm not saying that Christ is not the ultimate end goal of the Bible. Like, if you're preaching about King David, you should eventually get to Jesus. Jesus is David's kind of a interesting example because he is so much a type of Christ. But the reason the David stories matter is because of Christ.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't mean you don't preach about David.
No.
You do. There's still things to say about David. And there's lessons to learn from David. And there is significance in David and what he did. However, only ultimately because of Christ.
Yeah.
Does that sound better?
Yeah.
Does that make more sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yeah, I also think that I think
that.
Oh my gosh, Ben and I are gonna keep on starting sentences over the top of each other for the rest of the podcast.
That's okay. I'm used to it, and I think everyone else is too at this point. All right, go for it, Nolan.
I want Ben to be able to finish. I feel rude interrupting.
No, you're good. I interrupted you, and I'm holding my tongue. Keep going.
Okay.
I talked for like 5 minutes.
I think that I tend to fall more on the Jacob end of things with this whole discussion. I think that all of Scripture, like it is a book that is testifying to God's work. The greatest of God's works, obviously, is Christ. But I think that it's like a lot of that, like the early, like even the early gospel writings, like the way that Moses writes all of the book of Genesis is like, and all of the Pentateuch actually, the way that Moses writes is like fully anticipating, like alluding to the seed of the woman, seed of the serpent conflict that eventually like will be fulfilled in Christ. A lot of what Moses does is setting up characters who could potentially be like a new Adam and a new Eden, and then like bringing it home and reminding you without people's sin that they cannot be the next like Adam. And that ultimately, like, it does point to and it does anticipate Christ's coming.
And I'm not saying it doesn't, but I am saying that you have to be careful with, and I'm not even saying Spurgeon doesn't do this, but the main idea of a passage is not always Jesus.
Yeah.
So, like, if I take a random passage out of, hang on, I'm trying to think. Okay, so, like, I'm preparing a sermon on 1 Samuel 13 and 14. 2 chapters. It's about Saul It's basically using Jonathan to contrast with Saul to show that Saul does not have a proper view of God and that he is not obeying God properly. It would be wrong of me to say that this text's main idea and the thing that the author of this book wanted us to get out of it was that Saul is a bad king, but Jesus will be a good king. Now, you can say that, like, near the end or whatever, you can say, okay, Saul wasn't a perfect king. Someday we will get a perfect king as an application, but that's not what the text is saying. That author, Samuel, when he wrote that, he was not trying to draw an illusion between Saul and Christ. And it would be wrong of me and unfair to the text to say that that's the point of the passage. The point is contrasting Saul with David. And David, of course, later will be a type of Christ, but the text has its own thing to say, and I need to be careful to say what the text is saying. So Christ can get brought in at some point of the sermon, but not to, like, I can't say that Samuel was saying this to prove that Christ is a better king than Saul, because that's not why Samuel wrote that story. I can tell from the silence that I have said something that you guys disagree with, and I'm curious.
I think it is important to keep it in context. But what I disagree with is, and I don't think that this is what you meant, but this is kind of an implication from it.
Okay.
Is that God knew what his plan was for eternity. And God knew everything that was going to happen, everything that has happened, and everything that will happen. And I know I don't have to argue that point for you because you're even more on that boat than I am in some areas.
Yes.
Which, then if we believe that the Bible is wholly and fully inspired by God, I'm not saying we ignore the context of what the writings originally meant, but I would push back on the thought that it wasn't intended to point towards Christ. Because
I think I would feel similarly.
Because if we're
not to dog on Ben, I obviously do not want to talk.
Because this is something that we all are just naturally somewhat disagreeing on, and that's kind of the point of this is we all come from different spots and all have different beliefs in a lot of these areas, and usually can discuss them healthily. But and again, I'm speaking about myself, and I'm assuming in general you agree with most of it, not all of it, because I understand we do have differences in certain areas. But I think that if we believe that God inspired the whole text and God knew that Christ was going to be the path to salvation, then I believe that when he was inspiring those texts, whether it was about King David or whether it was the book of Job, or even going all the way back to talking about the Passover, I feel like there is a certain extent where it is pointing towards Christ, even if it's not the main point of it. It is still pointing towards him. There's
the disagreements to a certain point, and that's not the main point of the text, though. I'm saying it's not the main point. The main point of that story is not to say that. Now that could be a subsidiary point. That's a fine preaching point. That's not an exegetical point. That passage does not say Saul was worse than Christ. A preacher can say that because the preacher is bringing the text's relevance in, and depending on what parts you're trying to hammer on. But I should not be saying that Samuel foresaw Christ in all of his millennial glory and was contrasting him and Saul, because that's not what Samuel was doing when he was writing that text. And yes, obviously the Holy Spirit was superseding the text.
Mhm.
But he says stuff about Christ like that in a ton of other places where it is legitimate.
Mhm.
So we don't need to find it places where it's not, because there are plenty of places where it is. So many of the Old Testament prophecies in like Isaiah and stuff foresee Christ being a good king. And I don't know if there's any passages that directly draw a contrast between Saul and Christ, but you could see a New Testament author looking back and doing that.
Mhm.
And so you preach that message out of that passage. You don't preach it out of the passage that doesn't say anything about that.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm processing. So that's
Yep,
not
no,
what's
you're
going
good.
on.
You're good. Because I don't want to come across as saying that Christ isn't important or that Christ is not in the background of the Bible.
Mhm.
But I will say that, yeah, there are passages that aren't primarily, and that's an important part of this, primarily about Christ,
Mhm.
even if you can draw points about Christ from them.
Mhm.
Like Noah's Ark. There's a lot of things you can say about the Ark as a type of Christ, but that's not the only thing that story is saying, and that's not even the primary thing that story is saying, because the Bible never says that's what the story is saying.
Mhm.
The Bible says this is God's judgment on sinful humanity and how he delivered them, a remnant out of it in this case.
Mhm.
If you
But
only
also
focus
think about
on
the
New
context. With
Go ahead.
Noah, you have to think about literary context of who like Moses is writing that for.
Mhm.
Moses is writing that to be read by the nation of Israel, who is God's chosen to be delivered from like his wrath, and through his chosen people, Israel, the world will be shown God's greatness. That's a huge part of like the story, and that I think is why it's written that way. Like it's meant to be understood as this is like the first type of like the chosen people, the old covenant. Like God has chosen Noah and his family to be delivered from judgment, and through him, God even says that at the beginning of Genesis 7, maybe the beginning of Genesis 8, where it's like, "Through you will I uphold my covenant."
Mhm.
Yeah. So then you tie in the Christ thing, but you don't ignore the other things to say about Noah to get to that.
Mhm.
Oh, right, absolutely, yeah.
That's more where I'm at, is you can't be so tunnel visioned on the Christological side of a passage that you ignore the rest of it.
Mhm.
So then it's kind of getting into a priority thing, but
Mhm.
also this is going to be controversial.
Uh-oh.
Your congregation shouldn't. I don't know how I want to phrase this.
You're looking for church jobs.
Your people aren't stupid, and they can draw some of those connections for themselves.
Have you worked
It's
in a
okay
church
to
before?
say-
No.
It's okay. Okay, fair.
Spoken with love.
It's
Spoken with
okay.
love.
It's okay to sometimes give them something that's not just a straight gospel presentation.
Mhm.
At some point you do have to move on from the milk to the meat of the word.
Mhm.
However, that does not mean, and I know, Jacob, you're thinking of this now, so I want to make sure I say this. That does not mean you're memorizing minutia so you can do well on the Bible bingo game.
Mhm.
That is not what it's about at all. The Bible is not for memorizing random facts and figures.
Mhm.
What's important is that it changes something in your life, and that you live the way it tells you to live, and that God's glory is seen in your life, and that you're living for Him. It's supposed to take you somewhere.
Mhm.
Scripture and the text and preaching, all of it is supposed to evoke response in the hearer.
Yeah.
It's not to increase head knowledge, it's to increase action. It's to change action. If you preach a message and your people go away and the only thing you wanted them to learn from it was the dates and names of a time something happened, you're in the wrong for that.
Yeah.
But there's also a place for talking about the more confusing stuff in the Bible,
Mhm.
because they've got to learn it from someone at some point, and I'd rather them learn it from me than a random guy on TikTok.
Yeah.
Like, you can't complain about your congregation only knowing about theological terms from bad sources if you never give them information from a good source.
Yeah. That's true.
So that's that.
Mhm.
Hey, I don't know. He left. I'm streaming right now. We're on stream right now.
Mark said he likes to think about it like God is leaving little Easter eggs for Christ in the text.
I like that term.
Yeah.
That's not a bad way to put it, actually. I kind of like
Pointing
that.
towards him, but that's not the only thing that's going on.
Yeah.
Like a little like a spirit, like a little spiritual, like a little spiritual nibble, like when somebody's like, during church. Like,
Mm.
Does that happen to you when you preach, Nolan?
dude, there's like one of my
I
elders.
love it. I
Matt,
love it.
One of our deacons, I love him to death. He's so funny. During the men's retreat, we were just like lightly making fun of him this weekend. Because
Yeah.
every time somebody would say something during messages, he's from the corner, you hear, It's like, ooh, tasty, isn't it?
So you liked it. I was gonna
That's
say I
funny.
like churches where you're comfortable and when people are comfortable enough to do that.
That's fair.
Mhm.
Anyways, that's a whole other conversation as well.
No, that's awesome.
The church
love my
should feel
church.
comfortable during, like, yeah.
Mhm.
There should be a level of comfort and familiarity between congregation and speaker.
Mhm.
I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Or preacher, at least. Pastor.
Yeah,
Maybe not every speaker, but pastor.
yeah. How do I wanna?
How do I force the goats in Minecraft to ram me? Oh, come on! I just got knocked down to like half a heart because it headbutted me off the edge of a cliff.
Are you trying to give yourself justification for killing it for its horn?
Yeah.
No. You have to, getting the horns is a lot more complicated. You actually have to every like 60 to 90 seconds it'll randomly charge at you, and so you have to build up with wood, and it has to headbutt a tree for its horn to fall off.
Really? I didn't know
Really?
that.
Yeah, you can't kill them for their horns.
That sounds really annoying.
I've been at it for about 45 minutes, and I have 3 horns.
I'm inspired by your.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a good use of your time.
I'm inspired by the fact that you're still going.
I'm gonna head back pretty soon. I want to get one more.
Endless
because
endurance.
There's 4 unique goat horn sounds that you can get from the goats, and I have 3 of them. So
Nice.
Is it just random? Sorry, what sound they drop
yeah,
with?
it's random. So I have a couple of the same, but
Nice. I'm gonna run into the Nether and try to get some levels up here. Because our water's not source blocked yet, so we can't fish there, can we?
No.
not yet. You can. I think you can fish over the spots where it's healthy. But
Yeah.
all right, Jacob, who are some of your theologians that you kind of align more toward, that
that's
you
right.
find
That
yourself
was
being
our-
drawn toward?
That was our topic.
That's
wasn't
how
it?
this started, yeah.
Yeah, 'cause-
Because ironically, this is from a guy that I actually like.
Wait.
Like, I like Spurgeon a lot,
Oh yeah.
and that's kind of.
This all
I
came
did
from
not-
Spurgeon.
I did not expect that little comment to turn into such a big thing.
No, you're good. I was gonna say that's always an interesting thing hearing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm gonna be honest. I'm really bad at remembering like names and of different theologians and stuff.
Hey Ben, can I get a TP back home? I'm very far away and lost.
Is my oh, that's right. I'm not playing with Fulbright anymore. I want it to be more atmospheric. What was I saying? So a lot of the theologians that I appreciate are more along the lines of like maybe even if I don't necessarily agree with everything they say.
Yeah.
We were kind of talking about this in our group chat earlier, and it kind of got me thinking down this rabbit hole. There's 2 theologians that I really appreciate, even if I don't necessarily agree with everything they say. One of them is Nathan Finocchio. He's the head of Theos U, if you guys know what that is.
No idea.
It's like
He's a little more trad pilled than we are.
yeah, a little bit more
Really?
trad-pilled, but also very charismatic as well.
Oh, that's a
Um,
weird. No, actually, that's not that weird to me.
But what I really appreciate about him is how he has a very casual preaching style, like a very conversational, almost to the point of the first time I watched him preach, I was like, is this guy like stoned? Like that level of just chill, just talking about the Bible, and you could tell he's very
Okay.
passionate about it and very smart about it, but in a way
Yeah.
where he's very rational and very just explaining it,
like
talking
that.
about it.
I-
And I have a couple of his
tried to
books.
be
Sorry, go for it.
conversational.
Yeah.
I try to be conversational in preaching, which is
Mhm.
probably funny to hear, but
Yeah. And that's a style I've tried to emulate because I know I'm not going to be the most charismatic, crazy speaker. And not charismatic theologically, but just like, I'm naturally more of a chill, introverted guy. So I'm not going to be the motivational speaker pastor. And I'm okay with that.
you should be.
And then kind of along those same lines, another guy who does that a lot, and again, this is, oddly enough, a TikTok theologian is where I see him, but it's this is the guy who we were specifically talking about in the group chat. It's a guy named Cliff. I can't remember his last name, but he goes around on like college campuses and just debates people. He's like just talks to people who, in theory, would never talk to a Christian, and just lets them ask him questions, and he just explains his views logically. And there's a lot of his views that I disagree with. I want to make that very clear. I don't agree with much of what he says. But what I do very greatly appreciate is his execution of sharing his thoughts. He's very calm, he's very caring, and he just explains what he thinks and why he thinks it in a very rational, logical way. Sometimes too logical, which is part of where I end up sometimes disagreeing, where he takes a few too many logical steps with some things. But overall, I think he's a good example of that style of evangelism, the conversational, not just yelling at someone, but asking them questions and actually giving them the time of day to answer them before just yelling at them, "You're wrong, here's where it says that in the Bible."
I will say Cliff does not believe in a literal hell.
No. Which
I think
also
that's
then
a more
feeds
significant problem than you think.
Yeah, and so part of that is that view itself will probably feed to some of that theological discussion style, because of the fact that it's not as, I don't want to say urgent, but it's not as important of a thing to make sure that that you're telling them, here's the truth, here's what's wrong, and here's how you get from A to Z. But I really appreciate his style. In terms of theologians who I generally agree with, you know, that's a hard one, because again, there's a lot of theologians that I've learned a lot from who I don't agree with many of their stances on stuff. You know, like I really enjoy a lot of Piper's writings. I really, honestly, I think MacArthur is a very smart guy, but almost to his detriment.
Yeah.
Where I personally don't enjoy MacArthur's writings, because I feel it gets, I don't want to say too theoretical, but it gets too much focused on the, and I'm not saying that this is how he writes it, because I'm sure that's not what it is. But for me, it feels like too much like, look at how much I know, and not as much of look at how much this actually applies to your life.
Now, have you read any of his commentaries?
I've read, I think I have one of them on my shelf.
His commentaries read very, so we all, for our college, have had to read Biblical Doctrine by MacArthur and a guy named Mayhew. That reads very differently from his commentary.
Does it? Okay.
So, and he's got other books too, like 12 Ordinary Men is on the shelf.
Yeah.
Don't judge all of his writing by the Biblical Doctrine book. Mm-hmm. That's his systematic theology, and that is definitely the most scholastic of his writing.
As it should be.
I'm not going to say that MacArthur's perfect in every way, or that I agree with everything he says. However, his writing is a lot less lofty in most other stuff I've read.
Yeah.
So, like, I think you would probably like 12 Ordinary Men quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I find his commentaries helpful overall. I've never found a commentary that I think is perfect.
Yeah.
But
like, I definitely have some of his commentaries, and I definitely use them when I'm writing sermons because of how smart and how... again, I don't want to sound like I'm bashing smart people.
Yep.
That's not what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
I use a lot of his commentaries when I'm studying and writing because of how heavy and dense they are. But I also acknowledge that my ministry style is more focused on the relationships, and again, kind of goes back to what we were talking about, pointing people straight back to Christ without as much direct emphasis on the minutia of the theology. And part of that might be the group that I'm currently pastoring. You know, biblical literacy is very low. And so I'll acknowledge that I have to be focused on the, you know, I'm teaching them what the Bible says, obviously, because I want them to learn it. But I also know that at the end of the day, if they haven't heard the stories before, it doesn't matter what David did if they don't know who Jesus is. And so I've been trying to find that healthy balance between, you know, preaching the gospel, but also finding time to teach them, you know, through Jonah. And then point Jonah back to, like, the Easter story, for example.
And ideally, if you're doing it right, you should be doing both. Again, that's something I think Pastor Matt did very well, was he would talk about the passage itself, but he would always tie it back to Christ.
I was going to say, I really, I doubt he's watching, so I don't have to worry about glazing him too much. But I really liked Pastor Matt's style.
He was. I went to that church for, I mean, obviously because I had friends who went there, but also the preaching was the main reason I went there.
It was engaging. It was educational, but it was also at a level where you didn't have to be a Bible college student to understand it. He dumbed it down, but let me rephrase that. He dumbed down the words. He didn't dumb down the topics.
Yes.
Which
I
think
have a lot
is
of respect.
a good way to do it. Yeah.
That's the mark of a good pastor.
Say, I have a lot of respect for him. He knew his congregation and he knew how to preach what they needed at a level they would understand.
Yeah.
He wasn't condescending about it.
No.
Good, 'cause that's just as bad.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of disappointed he hasn't been to Emmaus to preach in, I think, 2 years now.
I can fill you in on some of that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Which is fair enough, but I'm disappointed about it.
Yeah.
Not notice the language about it, not at
No.
any particular. Yeah.
Because it's not.
Anyway.
That's a whole other topic for
Yeah.
off-stream conversation.
For sure.
Amen.
Amen.
Moving
brother.
on.
But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of theologians that I really like. But again, I feel like a lot of my stuff lends itself more to how well do they do the practical application of the knowledge, less on the how much can they write out about what they think, which I'll admit has its faults. You guys can probably recite more theological stuff than I can. I'll own that.
Necessarily.
And definitely more so than me.
Yeah.
I tend to be kind of
Let me
lower
rephrase that.
stuff.
You can explain your views with the right words.
Maybe.
Whereas
but none of that matters.
Yeah, my emphasis
None
has
of
always
that
been on
matters.
how can I practically get across that Jesus died for you and he loves you, but you need to follow him and obey.
Hmm. I was gonna say, even if I know the terms better than you, it doesn't matter if I can't communicate that to anyone, and if it doesn't change anyone.
Yeah.
That's something Dr. DeGear has been really good about, kind of hammering into me, is that a sermon is not just explaining all the minutia of a passage.
Yeah.
It's got to land somewhere,
Yeah.
and it's got to actually evoke a response and a change and a desire to change in the hearer.
And I think that the desire to change is more important than we often realize, because you can give people the tools to change, but if you don't inspire them to actually try to change, it doesn't matter in the long run.
You can preach, and this is something I think we can learn very well from history, is I think it's pretty indisputable that there have been a lot of times in history where the average person has known far more about the Bible than the average Christian today does.
Mhm.
Those were not eras of suddenly improved morality on a world scale.
Mhm.
Like, there were not necessarily more Christians in the 1800s than there are today.
No.
Now, there might have been, but there were also a lot more people who were well educated on theology who just didn't care, and it didn't change their lives.
Yeah.
Most of the medieval kings were at least somewhat familiar with theology because they had to be.
Mhm.
They had to know how to interact with the church, but that in a lot of those church bishops
Mhm.
knew all the theology and had read Aquinas, but they weren't saved.
Yeah. That's always an
the
interesting point
knowledge-
to me. How many bishops used to? It was literally just a job.
Yeah,
It wasn't like they themselves weren't saved, which was so strange to me.
it's so weird, but it was like almost a political
You'd be shocked at
position.
how many pastors are still like that.
That's true.
That's fair.
Did we have a die-off in our village recently?
I don't know.
Like the Plains Village?
I genuinely haven't been to the village since the last time I went there with you.
I was gonna say me either. I really haven't done much with villagers.
No, I'm running around trying to get to level 30, but all my stuff was so damaged that mending is just sucking up all the XP.
Yeah. No, and that's why I don't ever usually put much into villagers who aren't in my house, is because they're so hard to keep safe.
Yeah.
And then you
Well,
just
the thing is, there shouldn't be an issue for why my villagers are just not here, but there were literally like 30 here the last time I was on.
really.
One more thing I'm going to say on the topic of like theology. Well, not just the topic of theology, but that was that I feel like my views on a lot of it has changed since I've entered full-time ministry.
Which is
100%, I agree with you there.
Again, like, as I've said, it wasn't that I didn't care about the academics. I was a good student. I got good grades. Yada, yada, yada. But my emphasis was always more on how can I actually use this. And I feel like that itself has continued to grow through being in full-time ministry. And so this isn't me saying that Ben's going to change, but I'm really excited to see, because again, Ben is more on the, he knows his words and he knows his stuff. Like,
He's a guy.
and I'm really interested to see how that makes his ministry different from mine and different from Nolan's.
Yeah, I'm very, very curious as well.
And that's something that I talked about in my sermon last Sunday. Was I was talking about, we're called in 2 Timothy to do your ministry, not do my ministry, not do Nolan's ministry, not do Ben's ministry, but do your ministry. And how everyone has a ministry. We're all called to do ministry, but that doesn't mean that we're all going to look the same. That doesn't mean that Spurgeon and MacArthur are going to have the same preaching styles. They were all called to do a different style of ministry. Again, like him or hate him, Mark Driscoll's ministry is to be the brash, aggressive, hyper-masculine guy who calls out people and doesn't care. Like it or not,
There's a place for that, too.
That's what he does. I don't say that I agree with all of his stuff. I don't agree with all his theology. But everyone has their ministry that they're called to do. Obviously, some people's ministries are not true ministry. But that's where we have to ride the line of, how much are we willing to discount other people's ministries just because we disagree theologically with them? There's definitely a lot of people whose ministries I do discount, and I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to say who.
Yeah, I was going to say, be careful with the Mark Driscoll stuff.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, a lot more people being inclined to look at him and be like, hey, false teacher, Mark can avoid.
Yeah. And so again, I'm not saying that I agree with him specifically. I'm not saying, but just in general, that was something that I thought was really interesting and helped me gain a lot more perspective as I was writing that. Like, I was writing it and preaching to myself, like, something that I've been insecure about is, I'm not the most charismatic. I'm not the most engaging speaker. But that doesn't mean that my ministry is any less valid than, the people who can speak really well. It's just a different style because we're called to different things.
Yep.
Amen.
But
no, it's going to be very good for me too to work with people outside of a Christian college again. Because I'm kind of looking forward to it. I loved talking to the guys at camp, and the girls too, but the guys were more open with me, and it was really refreshing actually to get questions that weren't about minutia of theology and colored by everyone's different takes on different theologians, and the questions just like, hey, how important is it for me to kneel when I pray? It's like, oh, I've never thought about that. That's interesting that's like, it's a very practical thing. I'm glad that they're thinking about the practical things. I love
guy in your chat a couple of weeks ago who asked if you should fast for Ramadan.
I was gonna say, and I'm not gonna say whether or not that was a joke question because we don't know.
I don't know.
But again, like, there are a lot of questions that come up that we just, there's been questions that have come up. Why am I going? Yeah, my inventory's full. I gotta go back. That I, don't know an answer to, and I haven't thought about just because of the fact that it's gonna sound bad, but some of the questions I get asked are so simple that I don't know how to answer them.
Yeah, it's like
we did a Q&A series at our youth group.
Go ahead.
We did a Q&A series at youth group a couple weeks ago, and it was awesome because, like, you get questions like, hey, what is the Trinity and what does that mean? But then in the same, like, the very next question you drew out would be like, hey, why did God make dinosaurs?
Yeah.
And it's like, this
Fair
is
enough.
so sick.
That's what they want to know. Why not? They should learn. They should be able to know.
Yeah.
And by they should learn, I mean we should teach them, not they should just go figure it out for themselves.
Yeah.
That can't be wrong.
Educate yourselves.
But also we should be giving them the tools to educate themselves.
Yes.
But that's its own whole many-year process.
Yes.
So.
Awesome. I think that was good discussion. Nolan, did you go? I don't think you did.
We did not.
I said please postpone me because I wanted to think about it more.
You have been postponed until now.
That's true. I have spent my entire life being a big MacArthur guy. I love John MacArthur's commentaries. I think as far as like commentaries go, there's few other commentaries that I would like so much. Like I'm not gonna just glaze MacArthur either, because like I really, really have enjoyed, like I've been working on one of my little pet projects since I became a pastor is like building out my MacArthur's New Testament commentaries. Really love them.
Long process. Those are expensive and hard to find.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I found a place that sells them for $10 a piece that I've been like getting one from every time I go to that specific town.
Nice.
And
I've
it's
got
like a
three
bookstore.
now, but-
Yeah, they're all from the same guy's theological library. So the author was the lady who was running the place would be like, if you bought them all at once, I'd give you like a wholesale discount. And I was like, yeah, but the thing is, I don't have that much money in my bank account right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, I'd
but-
love to do that, but I can't.
Yeah, I digress. Anyway, I love MacArthur's theological thought. I love his use of Greek when he writes commentaries.
Mhm.
However, and there's a however to it.
There's always a however.
A large part of MacArthur's public ministry, especially in like his church leadership, his ecclesiology, and how he manages his church, I think one of the characteristics of those things has been this kind of lack of a real love for people.
Mm.
And while I think in MacArthur's younger years, he definitely cares so much for people. And that's evident when you read books like The Gospel According to Jesus and like some of his earlier works. Because I have read his earlier works too; they're very good. However, like when you hear about like elders in his church who are failing to discipline sin, when you hear about people in his church who have been very grievously hurt by people who are in leadership at Grace Church in that community, I think maybe it's a symptom of it's either a symptom of MacArthur being an old man who just kind of just speaks very bluntly and communicates his point exactly the same way. I wonder if a little bit of it is just he's so like good at what he does, and he's so like in it with ministry that like sometimes he just doesn't care about anything else. Which I don't know. I don't know the guy's heart. I know that like regardless of your thoughts on like women in ministry, like going up to, like telling Beth more publicly to quote go home isn't going to help anybody.
No.
It
just makes yourself look like
yeah,
a douche. Similar issue, different vein than the whole thing that we just talked about at that conference.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, dude, you're smart and you're right, but nobody wants to listen to you because you're being a giant jerk to people.
Yeah.
Like, but anyway, digress. I do generally have a favorable opinion of MacArthur, and I think he's a faithful servant of God. I think his theology drifts a little bit toward fundamentalism sometimes, which again, not always the worst thing in the world. I think there's some things we do need to be a little more fundamental on.
Well, that's also probably the generational divide.
Yeah.
Right.
But at the same time, I also probably would lean. See, I don't know. I go back and forth on the fundamental thing because I say
Drift
I'm more
toward
fundamental,
fundamentalism.
but also sometimes when I remember that like the fundamental movements, the Jesus made grape juice movements, it's like, oh, okay, no. But yeah, out of the three of us, I definitely drift the most towards fundamentalism.
Yeah.
I don't
Take
think
this
that's-
King James Bible and correct the Greek.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of KJV. It has a place. I would not preach out of it anymore.
I don't
translation
understand it.
song.
But
It's
we
a
can
very pretty translation, but I think we've also had the same argument discussion
Yeah.
in most of
I
our
have that-
episodes at some point.
I have a more thorough version of that argument in mind for a future episode.
Interesting.
Cool.
Just because I want to analyze some maybe pastors and theologians who I do not super appreciate or agree with. I have really in the last couple months appreciated Jim Hamilton, Sam Amati, and Alex Duke of Nine Marks.
Interesting.
I
I haven't heard of
Sam
any of
Amati-
them, but I have heard of
So
them.
those three guys do a podcast that my senior pastor and I are very into, called Bible Talk, which is, if you listen to them and then listen to the way that I talk about some of my theology takes here on this podcast, you will see a very, very clear, like, oh, that's where Nolan's getting all this from.
See, I've been able to tell you've been getting some from someone, especially the serpent and the snake thing, or the serpent and the woman's seed
Seed of
thing.
the woman, seed of the that stuff is totally that's a Nine Marks thing.
Nice.
But yeah, I think they've got guys like Jim Hamilton who is like so faithful, like getting like reading the text in context and at getting like the main point of things down. He's always the one who talks the longest on that show.
Like
I
me.
love how Sam Amati and Alex Duke bring like a great level of like realism and like a great like oh, this is so relatable, and like that's like what that means in like historical context. Anyway, like my pastor's like met Sam Amati before, and like I'm pretty sure is like his friend from Indiana's like next door neighbor.
Oh, that's hype.
Or maybe it's Louisville, but
Louisville.
Louisville. But I've also really been shaped by my personal philosophy of ministry has been hugely shaped by Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Oh, interesting.
I love Bonhoeffer. I wish he wasn't a universalist.
He was a universalist?
Yeah, he was a universalist.
There's no way.
Yeah. Yep, he is the universalist.
No way.
Sorry,
Yep.
sorry, Ben.
How is... Oh. Man,
Yeah.
that... I didn't expect that.
Yeah, I think
Universalism is one of those borderline salvation issue heresies. Like, I have trouble
Yes.
normally believing that a universalist can be saved.
yes, I think he started to drift toward universalism in his later years. I
How
don't
can
know
a
necessarily
guy
that he.
Had to deal with the Nazis hold to that. That just seems so weird to me.
Keep in mind, Bonhoeffer also died young.
Yeah.
But he died in a concentration camp. Like, how could you live for years in Nazi Germany and not see the need for a divine punishment? I don't know. I'm getting us off topic. Ignore me. Keep going.
Yeah, I mean, universalism aside, I do like me some Bonhoeffer. I think his philosophy is of Christian community, of intercessory prayer being the golden bullet of Christian community is what he called it. That is like so formative to like how I like teach my youth group, how I like work this community that I've been trying to establish with my students together. It is so based off of like Bonhoeffer stuff.
Nice.
That's interesting.
I was gonna say I
Yeah, but
honestly have read less of Bonhoeffer than I should have at this point. But
I've read very little Bonhoeffer. I might read less now, but no, I'll still read him at some
Bonhoeffer
point.
start with life together.
There's so much that I still need to read. I'll get him around to him at some point.
Actually, if you
My
if you
reading
ever
list is obnoxiously long right now. But go
if you
ahead.
guys ever come across Janae Epp, ask her. She did like a colloquium at Emmaus about Bonhoeffer because that's who she wrote her like senior thesis on.
nice.
Man, I wish I'd
Or-
been around more when like her and Ron were still big here.
Oh, gosh, Ron's a dog. Ron is a legend. I actually started out my time in Emmaus being not super fond of Ron, but I grew to really, really like him at the end.
Yeah, he probably
where I was
broke you
like-
up at some point.
Oh, 100%.
That's also true. Ron never actually wrote me up. Ron threatened to write me up many times,
He
but
didn't.
no,
Really?
well, part of that's why he and I were never close friends because I always steered clear of Ron when I was a student but like then after we were students, like when we were ushers together at Luca's wedding, I really appreciated Ron, even when it was stuff like, "Hey Nolan, don't be a clown when you're escorting Luca's grandma down the aisle."
Yeah.
To like the, and I was
Be
like,
professional, bro.
"Huh." Yeah.
And
It's
not wrong.
No, it was totally not wrong. And like just like driving around Chicago with Ron too is super fun. It grew my respect and appreciation of him immensely.
Shout out Ron.
Yeah, shout out Ron if you hear this. You're a legend. Yeah, there are definitely like professors at Emmaus who have influenced my understanding of like who is Christ, like how you love and serve others like Jesus does.
All three of us, I think, have probably been heavily influenced by Dr. Riley.
Yeah.
Oh, yep. Jeff has influenced me significantly.
He's
Yeah,
a
I
doctor
thought it
now.
out.
You can't call him Jeff anymore.
I can't call him Jeff because I'm graduated. I texted him for his birthday and said,
Yeah,
"Happy birthday, Jeff."
Nice. When was his birthday?
Like
I
last
forgot to
week.
text him.
Oh,
He hates you now.
I never know.
I'll text him today and say happy birthday, like as soon as we get off the podcast. He'd love that.
Genuinely, I feel like that's the main thing I use Facebook for at this point, is just remembering people's birthdays.
Yeah.
That's fine.
When's your birthday
That's
again?
fair.
What's that?
Speaking of which, when's yours again? I know it's soon.
January,
It's literally
right?
the Wednesday.
Jan-
It's the Wednesday before you get here, Ben.
Okay. I was gonna say I knew it was April sometime. I couldn't remember
April
exactly
24th. A week from
Oh
Wednesday.
yeah, that's what it
It's
is.
coming
'Cause you
up.
missed greatness by 4 days. Okay.
Happy birthday, Pharaoh.
Oh, I call it Ben. You dog.
Don't draw attention to it.
April
Moving on.
April 28th.
There's a couple different. There's a couple other theologians who I think have influenced my walk with Christ a lot.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some more. I definitely know that a large part of the discipleship aspect of ministry that I'm pretty passionate about has been shaped by Leroy Eames
Jenkins.
with what?
I said Jenkins.
No, not Jenkins.
Leroy
No, Leroy
Jenkins.
Eames. He wrote Disciple Making Made Easy,
Okay.
which has been very, very good for me. Yeah, it's a lot of books. It's a lot of books. It's a lot of
Yeah.
studying. As far as systematic theologians, I don't necessarily think there's any one person's systematic theology that I lean toward more heavily over another's.
That's
I try to be pretty open-handed with how I view that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I like MacArthur Mayhew stuff. It's a little too dispensationalist for me.
Fair enough. Heavily
I
dispensational.
won't. What?
That's fair. It's heavily dispensational, and you work at a
Yeah.
reformed part of the country.
That's fair. Yeah, as far as early church fathers, I kind of don't know how to read them, so I don't really read them.
Fair enough.
But yeah, if I'm looking for modern day, not necessarily big authors or writers, I love I love me a good Francis Chan sermon. I like to listen to Francis Chan sermons. I have appreciated in the past listening to I appreciate John Piper books. I'm trying to think of other preachers who I regularly listen to, because anymore it's more preachers that I know. I
Yeah.
listen to Hopes a lot. I listen to Hopes a lot because I like to hear Ross preach.
Yeah.
I listen to whenever Bowder or Ben preaches. I listen to them.
My favorite preacher is
recently-
Nolan Johnson.
Amen. But also,
I'm
since
still
I
I
got
was
plugged,
so impressed by your one on the Water of Life passage.
thank you.
That one actually, I was very impressed. I don't want to
The
say
John
surprised because the word surprise makes it sound like
It sounds
I
really
didn't
bad.
expect you to stop.
Nolan's an idiot. Wow.
No,
I mean-
impressed. Impressed is a much better word.
Yeah.
I would not have gone. Yeah, I don't think I would have preached it as well as you did. So anyway, enough stroking your
That was
ego.
the first sermon where I've gone preacher mode, where I left the pulpit and started yelling. That was the first time.
Mhm.
Oh, that was a fun one for me to preach.
Yeah.
I have my next big one that I'm going to preach on is probably I'm going to preach directly a little bit topically on the importance of youth ministry, and that's
Oh,
going to
okay.
be on graduation Sunday.
That's
enough.
one that I've been considering doing for the next time that I have pick a topic. Which I honestly
Yeah.
hate having to pick a topic. I prefer to
Yeah.
preach in series that Brian's doing. Because
Yeah, but my pastor likes his series a lot. He's like, Nolan, I know you really want to preach on this one. I think I'm just going to have you do something else because I want to keep running with my train of thought that I've been working with.
that's fair.
And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I understand.
Yeah. But so
Well, right,
again,
right,
my
so-
message that I gave on this last Sunday was I admittedly bit off a larger passage than I should have. However, I went 10 minutes over time because of the fact that there's so much you have to do when you preach a one-off. Because you have to
Yep.
preach the context, you have to preach the whole message, and then you basically have to wrap it all up. Whereas with
Can't
us,
leave
where
some of it hanging next week.
yeah, you can't leave any threads for the next time. And you,
Ben, where are you? Are you at Spawn?
Yeah, I'm at my base.
I've been running
Okay.
around the Nether trying to find Nether course, and I'm kind of lost.
Use Ben's zombie spawner.
That's right, I forgot he has one.
Nolan, you never asked if you could use. Actually, no, you did. Never mind.
Ben,
Jacob.
can I get a little cough out of the Nether? I would have lived.
I figured you would.
Actually, could I get one potato? I accidentally baked all my potatoes.
Yes, here's a potato.
Thank you, sir.
Nolan, why are you in my house?
I want to be up by you guys. I'm literally coming
Intruder.
for you.
Intruder.
I want you guys both to see me.
He's lonely. Nolan's too much a social creature.
Hey guys,
Yeah.
my tummy hurts.
I don't get it. What'd he do? I heard
He
weird
blew
noises.
his goat horn, and then how low did you
Oh.
get there, Nolan?
1 heart.
What were you
Okay.
actually?
Yeah.
Okay, so I won't
It's the
jump.
fall damage. I only have feather falling 2 on my boots.
Oh, I don't
This is
remember.
a tall place.
I have feather falling 1. Yeah, I would have died. Oh my gosh, what a horrible sound that is.
I love it. It's hilarious.
Oh, it is.
It's better.
And that one's so deep. That one's like a Dune soundtrack thing.
Yeah. We maxed out Bowers' microphone.
Mine is more song, but
Janessa hates that song. I'm waiting for her to come in
What?
and yell at me about it.
oh yeah.
She says it scares her.
Here.
I was gonna say, didn't the movie creep her out?
Yeah.
Which is funny and not the least understandable thing.
That's such a low pitch.
You ready?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm farming
You're
potatoes.
keeping that, by the way. I already have one of those.
Okay. Now I can make fart jokes.
If I'm looking for like modern or like current Christian voices that I look to a lot, one guy that I've really liked has been a guy called Underdog Theology on YouTube.
I've heard of him.
I was telling Bowder about him right before we started the stream.
Yeah.
Like he's good. Like he's like he came out of a fundamentalist background, is a little bit more reformed now.
Okay.
And the way that he is like his whole not shtick. I don't want to say shtick.
Yeah, because that
His
sounds
thing is he does a podcast. It's called Underdog Theology.
Yeah.
Which is basically like a YouTube commentary video, but
Yeah.
also like a stream where he goes live like maybe once or twice a week, and he talks about different things that he's seeing in like the Christian spheres on Twitter that he's in.
Sure sounds like he's muscling in on our territory.
bad. Nolan, what did
A
you just
little
blow
bit.
up by my farm?
No,
Nothing.
Nolan. That was a little too quick.
I heard a creeper while I was putting stuff away in my chest.
Nothing.
I'm filling the hole right now.
Okay.
Liar.
Sees his name tag running into the distance.
21:8. Liars go
Literally,
to
I
hell.
filled in the hole.
Burn, burn, burn.
Such a horrible song.
It is. I love
My
it. My kid
past-
taught it to me.
When we were at the men's retreat, one of the guys that I was with pulled a joke lie that was really blatant while I was sitting across the table from my pastor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, Revelation 21:8, buddy. And then my pastor was like, I heard a song once like that. And they went like, and then I joined in with him. And we sang the whole song together in sync.
That's beautiful.
That is amazing. Peak pastor bonding.
Hmm.
I bond pretty well with my senior pastor. He's a good dude.
That's good.
Not as well as Bowder and his senior pastor.
No,
But
we
Well,
get along really
That's
well.
okay.
We
you guys
goof
get along
around.
too well.
We goof around a little bit too much in the office, admittedly.
you bully other people in your office.
Yeah.
If half of what I've heard about poor Kira is true.
Yeah. Maybe.
There's complete lack of attempts to deny it.
Yeah. I will say. Oh, I almost put away the wrong axe. Today in the office,
my
something was
office-
happening,
A lot of fun.
and like literally, it was within like 5 minutes. She like roasted me like 10 times though, so she gives it back sometimes.
Good. She's fighting back.
Fight
Was
the power.
she the lady who's in your B-reel today?
She wasn't in it today. She was a few days ago.
That's what it was a few days ago. It wasn't today.
No, what was my I think my B what was my B-reel today? I don't remember. Someone keeps coming in my house and
don't-
leaving my doors open.
that sound like, Jacob?
Nolan. Does anyone have an
Yeah,
extra
I don't
mending
know the
bow
rest here.
by any chance? Or mending book?
Mending bow?
Book.
Any of
I
us
have a
have an
couple.
extra mending bow?
Okay, I'll see myself out now.
Did Nolan just say he has a couple?
Yeah.
I am far behind.
Nolan's
you
running around
in
just opening all my doors. No, you can't steal my doors!
this. Steal your doors! Steal your doors!
He stole my doors and the crafting table that was next to them.
Steal his doors and lick them.
And I don't have any cherry wood on me either right now, so I have to go get out. Oh, gosh. Nolan's a monster. Now I hear a zombie walking through that door, Nolan.
I'm actually tracking creepers right now.
Oh my gosh. No, 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 no.
I'm gonna steal your doors.
You stay out.
Sounds like a Patrick thing.
Yeah, it really does. Alright.
I put them back, don't worry.
After I just put them... Ah, yes, airlock. You didn't even... Nolan, what is this store here? I can't take you anywhere. Blows the goat horn and runs away.
Steal your
Opposite
doors.
of a raid. I show up, put things in your house you don't want, and then leave.
Steals your doors. Blows a goat horn. Refuses to elaborate. Runs.
It's such a deep one.
I know. Actually, I like this. The first one that I found is my
Yeah,
favorite.
that one.
Yeah. This one.
Yeah. I don't even know where you are anymore. Oh, there you are.
Pardon. What were we talking about before?
I don't remember. I completely lost track. We have been on the topic of theologians. No, why is there more
Yeah.
glass broken on my roof?
I've actually been there a while. I broke that a long time ago.
But he did break it.
Yeah.
Let that fact
Um,
not escape.
No, I was talking about underdog theology. The guy's name is Dean. Don't know his last
Oh
name.
yeah.
He's a smart dude. And I think he is. I think he's very fair, very even-handed. He
Oh,
does
that's
like
why-
he
ahead.
does a weekly thing in every one of his podcasts. He does one called the penalty box, where he takes like brainless things that people say in the Christian verse, and then he assigns like penalties to them,
That's
like
fun.
fighting or high sticking or something like that.
That's funny.
Is he Canadian?
And then he also does a segment on a show called Welcome to Fundyville, where he just takes a clip of like two guys like with a microphone 8 feet from their face talking about the King James only Bible,
Oh god.
and then he's like, "You just know some poor 16-year-old kid is like slapping himself on the face like repeatedly because he's got to deal with these two geezers."
Yeah.
Like,
Funny.
it's fun stuff.
Yeah.
Nice.
Either of you watch Ready to Harvest at all on YouTube?
Watch
Oh,
what?
I like him.
I find him helpful for denominational survey stuff. I don't know
Mhm.
anything about his beliefs or his viewpoints. He doesn't put them forward in most of his videos, but
Hmm.
very useful, like denominational surveys.
Yeah, he's very much like the good version of he's like the not as pushy version of Redeemed Zoomer.
Nice.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. So I appreciate him. I've listened and watched his stuff a decent bit. Actually, while I was trying to figure out which Baptist denomination the church I'm involved in was part of.
He does videos on the Brethren too.
Yeah, they're not as small as we sometimes like to joke that they are. There have been significant people who came out of the Brethren, like
Oh,
George
yeah.
Mueller, but they're still definitely one of the more minor ones in our part of the world, I guess, at least.
Yeah.
But as much as I like to make the jokes, they're not actually only 70 people.
Yeah. As much as it feels like it when you're at a mass.
Yeah. As much as it feels like it when you talk to Cobb and he
And he
like,
knows every
knows
brethren in America.
every single Brethren church in America and knows people from most of them.
Oh my gosh. It's
What's
so
the
hilarious.
denominational
funny.
structure like?
What'd you say?
I wonder what denominational structure is like.
Say, I wonder what being non-denominational is like.
Imagine.
Yeah, I was gonna say I have grown to really not like Redeemed Zoomer in the last couple months.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This
you
is tough
mentioned
because
that a couple times.
I liked him a lot. He's just is so abrasive and like he seems to build. I really like what he does. Like his denominational review videos are great. Like I would go to nobody else for those. He's just so like high on himself with Operation Reconquista or whatever it is he calls it. It's like,
Oh,
dude, like this is like you are not the only source of like truth. Like
Yeah.
there are other people besides you who are doing a great job in their churches, and they don't all need to submit to your ideas, and they don't all need to like be reconquered from the inside out. Like
Yeah.
sometimes churches can go apostate.
I think it's a fool's errand. I appreciate what he's trying to do. I get where he's coming from. I don't think you're going to recapture the liberal mainline churches.
No.
I think the Bible is very clear that a lot of the church is going to go apostate near. I'm not even going to say just in the end times, just in general. There are going to be a lot of apostate churches, and there's going to be a lot of false teaching in the church.
Yeah.
And I think you're ignoring those warnings when you think that you can go and somehow change a multi-thousand person, decades or centuries old denomination. They're not going to listen to you.
No.
And I don't know what you're like. I don't even know how you would go about moving the machinery of changing hundreds of thousands of people's minds and getting different conferences in those denominations to change their stances.
Yeah, because that's the thing that we don't even remember a lot of times is that I was talking to someone who used to be a Free Methodist pastor, and we were talking about at dinner the other night how like they were almost became a United Methodist pastor because of the fact that they realized that the United Methodist as a whole doesn't all agree with what the United Methodist says.
Yeah.
Which is such an interesting thing to me that it's like, why do you even have a denomination then if you're going to all disagree on stuff?
Yeah.
But that's a whole other topic again.
Why would you stay in the denomination if your whole church disagrees with it? But
consistent pay.
Or if you disagree with it. Well,
consistent pay so that you can continue the ministry.
Say, as much as that sounds mercenary, it's somewhat legitimate.
Yeah.
I wouldn't feel right doing it.
No, I wouldn't either. And then they didn't because that's what they were like. I can't justify it. But
I'd be curious. I know.
No.
Oh. Okay.
And I'm not gonna name drop on stream.
No, I wasn't gonna ask you on
good.
stream.
But no, it's not someone you know.
All right.
It's someone from up here. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and again, I don't know anything about this Forum Zoomer guy. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe he's got some great master plan, and a lot of great things in church history have been
looked down
thought
on.
Impossible by other people.
I think he's elevating a lot of stuff to primary level issues that are not primary level issues.
Yep.
Like I think
which for discussion can be fun. And for discussion can be fruitful because then you all can defend what you believe and why you believe it. But if your goal is to unite the church under true doctrine, then you aren't the only one who's read the Bible, and you've read it a lot less than a lot of other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Smarter people than him have come up with very, very opposing ideas.
And so I'm not saying it's impossible to reunite the church, but I am saying it is unlikely to happen because of an Instagram page.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
possible. I mean, technically, unlikely though.
At some point, we'll all be united, but that won't be until eternity.
Yeah, that is not the hill I would choose to die on.
No.
And you know me, I'm a lot quicker to die on a hill than most people.
Yep. You hold a lot stronger to a lot of your views than I do. And
yeah.
That's good.
Yep.
I also don't like reactionary, like hot take Christianity. That bothers me a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clickbait Christianity is never the answer.
Or the hot takes that are just held because they're hot takes, or that you just aggressively push because they're hot takes.
Because you like to say stuff that makes other people feel dumb.
Yeah.
I will say.
Or you want to.
Actually, I'm not.
Or you like having a platform.
Yeah. I was gonna say that's made me lose a lot of respect for some people, whose whole method of discussing theology is simply just you're dumb because you can't discuss this on an as educated level as I have.
Yeah, it's a bit annoying too when it's someone who has been a teaching professor as a career for 40 years, and you're expected to be able to engage at the same level as them.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm not gonna name drop again because it's someone that I very respect.
Oh,
But
yeah.
you guys both know my thoughts and who I'm talking about.
No, I do. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I happen to greatly like and admire said person.
Mhm.
But there's a place to remember, undergrad student is not the same as a doctorate.
Yeah.
Now, yes,
You'll
we
have
should
to tell
all
me
be
who it is after the
striving.
stream's over because I'm lost.
We should all be striving to reach that sort of level
Oh,
of knowledge.
100%.
But
No,
There-
But
Yeah.
when someone disagrees with you and is trying to have an honest conversation about why they disagree and is open to hearing why you believe what you believe and why you teach what you teach, you can't
Yeah.
just say I know this better and here's the terms to back up what I say
Yep,
without actually giving it a second thought.
I'm gonna say I
argue about
kind
just posting Bible verses with no context.
I mean that's a whole other that's the same different side of the same coin, but yeah.
there was someone who I used to get along with really well who sometimes at camp we'd be talking about something completely random and unrelated, and said person would just open the Bible, read a random verse that had nothing to do with anything else, and then just look at us like some massive point in an argument had been won.
Yeah.
And most of the time I wasn't even sure what the point trying to be made was. It was just
Yeah.
like,
Random
Yeah,
sentence for the sake of a sentence.
that's a cool verse. How was that relevant to whatever we were talking about?
Yeah.
So honestly, it's funny now looking back,
Yeah.
but
Time sheds a different light on everything.
time does. That's true.
Yeah.
Said person is someone I still hope kind of. Yeah, I don't know. I hope
Yeah.
that good things for that person. But
Yeah.
whatever.
I was thinking about this a couple months ago. Just I know people who have generally kind of, I think, apostatized a little bit more throughout the years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sad
And-
how common that becomes as you get older.
Yeah,
It's at the point
it's
where they
very,
have to make their faith their own and not just their parents.
Yeah.
When you see
I
it.
actually find it very. I mean, for being honest, I find it very disheartening. But
Oh, yeah. 100%.
But I think with a lot of people who apostatize, I think it's people who are not necessarily leaving the faith, but getting found out. And if they're not getting found out, and if they're not getting found, they're getting found out for like having never been Christians, because that's my view of eternal security. But I think even in a different vein from that, I think that there will be Christians who just like get it wrong, but they always will come back or they'll repent. And I think that being called to repentance is much more common than like being left to your apostasy.
Yeah.
Because we have a God who is jealous for our affections and chases after us. So even if somebody's like being a moron and like clearly like this person is not like saying a right thing about the Lord, but I think those people will come to repentance, that the Lord will be faithful to bring them back to the foot of the cross to confess like whatever issues, like heart issues, cause people to get so rigid, like stubborn about things like that. Yeah. And I think that's important to remember, even as we talk about, because like we've talked a lot about like people we disagree with tonight, but at the end of the day, if you are a believer, we are all under grace. We
Yeah.
are all at the same level as every other believer. I mean, not that we've already
In a
attained
manner.
this or are already perfect, but like we press on. I mean, as Philippians says, for the goal of the prize of the upward call in Christ Jesus our Lord.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, we are no more worthy than Ravi Zacharias is of forgiveness. Earthly, so yes. But in terms of
yeah.
sin is sin. And if Christ can forgive us, then who are we to say that Ravi wasn't actually saved and just had a very difficult struggle with a certain sin?
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that goes for any teacher or preacher who's stuck in a habit of habitual sin.
Yep. Some of that. Also, what level do you have to be at for netherite?
Below lava level is all I know.
Oh, okay.
What is it? Y9?
And you can't be in a basalt delta biome.
Okay.
I think it's Y9.
Cool.
Yeah.
Not to completely derail the topic, but wanted
you're
to make
good.
sure I wasn't down here for nothing.
Yeah. I was gonna say we're actually getting pretty close to time. We're at 1:54. So do you guys have any
Yeah,
final?
that went all
I was gonna say
fast.
we kind of rambled around the topic. I don't even know if we ever fully covered our topic or not, but that's all
I
right.
think we kind of did.
Yeah.
We each gave some favorites. I think you gave some favorites.
Yeah.
And honestly, our goals collectively for tonight, like we pick a topic to foster conversation around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I even was reminded of this by Bowder and Ben earlier tonight. But like, you don't have to be so rigid. We're never so rigidly stuck to our structure that we can't divert and have healthy conversation.
Yeah. Rigidity in certain areas is great, but rigidity can also cause division. And obviously, division
Right,
isn't. We're not aiming for division, and obviously, our discussion, like, if we were trying to be like, no, we have to accomplish this topic tonight, and we can't talk about anything else, that rigidity wouldn't cause a problem. But in all things, we're trying to remember that we're having a conversation about complex things that are naturally going to lead to other conversations, whether it's a small comment about Spurgeon's preaching style, or I'm sure I've said things that have spurred conversations that I didn't intend to, and that's just the nature of this. And so usually we answer more guests or more viewer questions, but I didn't actually see any tonight come through. But if you didn't send in a question because of the fact that we were just rambling, feel free. I pinned a comment with our Discord link. Feel free to join there, and just drop any questions you have in really any of the channels. It's not super formal and organized yet. That'll be at some point. But feel free to jump in there. You can talk or ask questions in there, and whether we answer them there or save them for a stream will be up to us. But if you have any questions, that'll be a great, or suggestions for things we can do on stream, or et cetera, et cetera. Feel free to join there.
Question will be dignified with a response.
Yeah. Even if I know people say this a lot and don't actually mean it, but genuinely, when we're talking about the Bible, within reason, I like how I just caveated against exactly what I was about to say. There's no dumb question, because everyone's coming from different places and everyone's coming from different backgrounds. And so while something might feel like small and insignificant to the 3 or 4 of us, depending on if Joe's able to join, in the grand scheme of things, any time that we're conversing about Christ is glorifying Him and is worshiping Him. And so even if it seems like an insignificant question, if you're wondering about it, and you think it might be profitable for other people to hear the answer, shoot it in, and we'll do our best to answer it in a way that we think is biblical, and both loving to the person answering the question and loving to each other, as we sometimes disagree on things. But with that, did you guys have any other closing thoughts, or?
Not
Read
really.
your Bibles. Study the scriptures for yourself.
Yeah. I was going to say, don't take anything that we say at face value. We try to
You mean our undergrad degrees don't make us instant experts?
Yeah. That means we aren't infallible. The only thing that's infallible is the Word of God.
And the Pope.
He's joking.
Incorrect.
Anyways. But yeah, so pull out your own Bibles. We'll answer your questions, but the best way to answer your questions is reading for yourself. And then asking other people who know the Bible obviously is beneficial.
Oh yeah.
But if it's pointless to ask questions if you aren't also investing time in getting to know it yourself. And some of your best questions and best conversations come from things that we are actively reading in the Bible, in our own Devo time, or prepping for either messages or homework or whatever. If you're not in the Bible, then you're not learning, and you're not growing. So,
Bestie.
so true, bestie. The pond is slowly coming along. This is a very long process, but it's getting there. But anyways, I think we'll end it there for the night. So thank you all for joining episode 8 of Biblecraft. We hope you all enjoyed. If you're watching the VOD, be sure to comment down below, leave a like, let us know you watched it, and if you have any questions, drop them in the VOD comments too.
Smash that subscribe button.
Smash the like, smash subscribe, and with that,
Like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that bell.
and we'll see
Ring a
you
ding.
next time.